Hello and good morning. This is arplenoon, also known as Phoenix. I am back for another reading of The Bridge Jumpers. We are at Chapter 8. You can read this chapter and any of my other Undertale AU works at archiveofourown.org, also known as AO3. Simply search for arplenoon and you will find all of my works there. Let's go ahead and get started. Summary. Prodigal finds himself being hunted by a murdering killer. Meanwhile, PJ rushes to Omega to face off against Shattered Dream. Terror filled Prodigal's soul. Not only was he still recovering from the explosion, but watching his sister thrown through a portal to God knows where. Fear quickly turned to rage, eyes glowing red. He turned his sight on murder. "Where did you take my sister?" Charging at the sands, he summoned sharpened bones into his hands, swinging madly. As expected, Murder was able to dodge easily, but the look on his face, Prodigal wouldn't understand until later. "Murder! He's slow! Just kill him!" Killer's voice rose over the sound of distant destruction. With a grunt, Murder summoned sharpened bones into his hand as well, meeting Prodigal in a flurry of blocks and punches. "Why isn't he trying to stab me?" thought Prodigal, who gladly would have staked the small skeleton through the soul. He could tell from Murder's controlled movements that he was only putting up defense. Before Pro realized, he'd been elbowed in the spine, doubling over. Certain he'd be stabbed in the back, suddenly he felt the air pressure change. Rhyme had run up, grabbing the back of Murder's jacket and an extended arm, before throwing him up and towards the street. Before Murder could meet a nasty landing, he teleported to his feet. Killer skirted beside his partner, having a hard time dealing with G at the close range. "These guys are really starting to piss me off." "Ain't so funny with people who could fight back, huh? Is it?" Rhyme taunted before looking to Prodigal. "You alright?" Pro nodded, sucking in a breath as he stood up straight, looking back to the two assailants. "Screw this! Murder, what's up with—" said Killer before Murder reached out, grabbing Prodigal, Rhyme, and G with blue magic. "Gee, about time," he continued, summoning 3 Gaster Blasters aiming at them. "God, I hate blue magic," Rhyme grunted, but launched her fists for the 2 Sanses. The both of them dodged, but it was enough to offset Murder, pushing the 3 of them out of the blast zone and free. "Ugh. These are expert killers. We need to run." G turned towards the other 2. He grabbed Prodigal's hand, about to flee. "Wait! Luna is still hiding in the cafe. I'm not leaving her," said Rhyme. "Murder kidnapped Diva," was the best Prodigal could respond to both. Before there was time to think, Killer teleported above Prodigal. He came down, piercing Pro's chest with a blue bone, pinning him to the ground. The attack came so sudden he didn't even feel the pain. G cried out, swinging his sword, but the sands disappeared in a flash. "Those bastards!" cried Rhyme, looking back frantically. She fell down beside Prodigal. "Prodigal, are you all right?" Struggling to breathe, he wasn't really sure. I'm fine." Murder was next to teleport in, landing on G's back. He shot a bone down through the blue bone, shattering both. Prodigal tensed in pain, but was freed. The hooded sands teleported before G could hit him. Did Murder just save him? He wasn't going to waste the time to be sure. Prodigal forced himself up, grabbing G and Rhyme, and teleported to the alley behind the cafe. "Wait, Prodigal, what about Luna?" said Rhyme, but she was cut off as Prodigal closed his eyes, collapsing against the concrete, breathing heavily. G gently picked him up. "He's hurt. That was a lot of magic." "Not far. Back alley." Prodigal tensed and heaved in pain. "You lost them!" they heard Killer's voice echo. "Relax, I killed the target," followed Murder. "Did you actually see him turn to dust?" "I did. Now let's get moving. We can grab supplies before we have to meet back up with Shattered." The 3 of them waited a moment before Rhyme looked around the corner, checking to see if their attackers were gone. "They're gone!" said Luna, phasing in through the wall, making Ji and Rhyme scream. Sorry! The ghost lizard shuddered. Luna, don't do that! Rhyme grabbed her chest before hugging her wife. Prodigal, he's hurt! I can help! Said Luna, floating to him. Her claws filled with green magic, and she held them to the skeleton's chest. Prodigal took an unsuffered breath. Gratitude filled G's face. Meanwhile, the sounds of explosions and sirens continued to erupt from the center of the city. The four of them looked between each other, uncertain what to do. We have to help. We can't let those freaks tear up our home, said Rhyme. Let me take a drink of water. An alert signal blasted through the doodle sphere. Paper Jam accidentally smeared red paint across the canvas he was working on. The kids went quiet. Grady and Fresh looked down as Template answered the signal. It's from the OT. What? Dream is attacking the city? What? Said PJ, dropping down, checking the same screen. My dad? No, that can't be right, Pallet laughed. Shoulder to shoulder, PJ and Template looked through the messages and images coming in. Camera footage from the hospital showed Dream flying in, firing explosive arrows, targeting anyone who looked like an authority. Something's not right. He doesn't look okay, said PJ. Do you think it's a different AU? Said Template. Maybe. Either way, we gotta stop him. Looking over, it was clear no one knew who should go. Ink was their leader. Normally, he'd make the decisions for something like this. But they had no choice. PJ had to step up. Me and Template will go. Gradient Fresh, you stay with Palette and Lux. If we need any more help, we'll call in backup. You sure you got it, little broski? Asked Fresh, landing down beside them. PJ nodded. One of us just needs to touch him with a band coat to get him out of the OT. We can try figuring out who he is later. Looking to each other in agreement, Template turned and opened a portal to the OT, both leaping through. They landed on a street just in front of the hospital, smoke and dust billowing up everywhere. However, even through the cloud, they could make out where Dream was just by the glow that radiated off his body. Both were about to charge when they spotted Horror running through the smoke and the rubble, cutting down anything that moved. Template, take care of Horror. I'm going after Dream, said PJ. Are you sure you can take him on your own? Paper Jam nodded. Armed with freshly loaded paintbrushes between his fingers, he leapt off. First thing, he had to get Dream out of the sky. Swiftly and quietly, he aimed for the back of the Fae, throwing a splatter of rainbow-colored paints against the wings. A crackled gurgle escaped Dream, a turn of the head searching for his attacker, but he had to focus on landing without taking damage. You're not the Dream we know. Who are you? Called PJ. Those hollow sockets focused on the inky skeleton. That broken skull leaked black smoke. Oh, you don't recognize me, Paper Jam? There's a new order in the universe now. You may call me Shattered, and my brother Nightmare your new king. What? PJ raised his brushes to create a protective barrier as Shattered launched an explosive arrow at him. Even so, the blast pushed PJ back. He's after me, said Core Frisk, appearing beside PJ. Frisk, said PJ, looking to the floating chromatic 8-year-old in a suit. That is our Dream. He's been poisoned by Nightmare. We need to get him banned out of the OT. I'll draw his attention, they said, before floating away. Get back here, called Shattered, launching more arrows towards Frisk. However, Core seemed to be able to handle themselves, teleporting before each blast landed. Shattered tried to chase, but their wings buzzed, still sticky from the paint. Now was his opportunity. PJ ran into melee. All he needed to do was touch Shattered to get him out of this AU. However, Shattered's bow transformed into a pair of blades, which PJ barely dodged. They cut his coat, which luckily reformed from their goopy nature. I don't want to hurt you, cried PJ, throwing dreams of paint as he leapt out of range. Dream, you have to snap out of it! What is covered with the face of heaven to be discovered that can do me good? Shattered hissed, flicking the paint from his weapons. PJ paused and blinked. What? With a roar, the possessed Fade charged. Paper Jam blocked the oncoming attacks with temporary paint blocks. Shattered cut through two of the brushes in his left hand as the second blade swung for his head. A loud clash of metal against metal, sparks flew. A papyrus had shoved himself between the two. A wrathful glare, glowing orange eye. Even Shattered showed a moment of fear. Skep! PJ cried in relief. I need another drink of water. The much taller skeleton shoved Shattered away with ease, brandishing two taser rods. PJ held up a hand. Don't kill him! It's Dream! He's ill! I won't. But he's killing people. We need to get him banned. Nodding, PJ retrieved more brushes from his bag and reloaded his paint. Shattered growled in frustration, eyes darting in search for Core, but they'd disappeared. Skep wasn't in the mood for questions and answers. The guard charged, capturing Shattered's full attention with a flurry of blows. Possessed or no, PJ marveled as someone from a classic timeline kept pace with the Fey Lord himself. He had to shake himself and engage. Just in time, too, as Shattered took to the air, summoning his bow. Leaping over Skep, PJ splattered the front of Shattered with a twirl, throwing his other hand to grab any extremity. However, the Fey reflexed, grabbing PJ's wrist. He should have fallen to his feet, but Shattered summoned a sword, cutting off his arm. PJ screamed. He never felt this kind of pain before. Landing on the ground, blood like black ink poured from his upper arm. With his right hand, he gripped it in pain, his severed limb landing not too far off. Shattered cried out as electricity buzzed. The Fey creature landed beside him, barely catching himself after Skep had fired a taser gun. Just then, PJ spotted several figures in the smoke. Far off, people were rushing in to help, but closer, a Sans and an Undying, Mediton, were duking it out. Template Cape leaping in just in time, grabbing who PJ could see was Killer and banishing him out of the OT. Not far from them, Murder faced off against two papyruses PJ didn't recognize. A tall one fighting with a sword, the other shorter than most, who had a nasty chest wound. PJ yelped and fell forward. Loud metal bashing rang in his ear. He sat at the feet of Skep and Shattered as they clashed weapons. He cursed himself for cowering so. Those useless fools! I'll kill Prodigal myself! Hissed Shattered, as he attempted to disengage from Skep. But as his attention focused on the smaller papyrus, PJ saw his opportunity. He let loosing from his wound, his bloody hand snatched hold of Shattered's ankle. The band code was transferred. The Fey aggressor blinked from sight. Gasping, PJ grabbed for his wound again. At least the bleeding stopped. Paper Jam, said Skep, coming to his side, but his attention turned toward the others, still facing against Murder. Fairly quickly, Murder found himself trapped in a cage of bone. Glancing about, obviously he was outnumbered. Summoning a portal below him, Murder fell through and vanished. Wait, no! Yelled the smaller papyrus, running up to the cage. Are you all right? Said Skep, kneeling beside PJ. I'll be fine. I know what to do. PJ took a few breaths. After brushing his hand on his jacket, he reached for his severed arm. Hold this, would you? Skep looked a bit squeamish, but did as instructed. Touching the marks on his cheek, PJ pulled forth a yellow needle and pink string. Rolling up the cut sleeve, he sewed his arm back on, slowly feeling his fingers again. Oh, stars, PJ, are you okay? Said Template, running up. Paper Jam smiled and nodded as Cora reappeared before them. Prodigal, they were hunting you. Why? What? Me? I don't know. said the short papyrus as the taller one was helping him approach. You're lying. I know you stole Skep's credentials and went through confidential reports. You what? Said Skep, standing up quickly. The one called Prodigal backed up into his friend. Eye sockets wide, he shuddered, but formed no words. Cord turned to Skep. As for you, I know you kept Melody's journal, which should have been turned over. Because of this leak, Nightmare has made a move against the Dreamfalls and possessed Dream. A similar expression of dread came over Skep, but dissolved into shame. Core sighed before turning back to Prodigal. You're under arrest for stealing top-secret information and putting the whole multiverse at risk. The light faded from Prodigal's eyes as he held his face, his whole body tensing in panic. The taller papyrus put an arm around him, stepping forward slightly in defense. Now wait just a second, spoke up Robot Undying. Why should he get punished when you've been keeping things from us? A ghost Alphys gently floated in, grabbing her arm. We need to keep these things secret for everyone's safety and well-being, said Core. Alright, well, if you already knew Prodigal and Skep were doing something they shouldn't have, why didn't you step in to stop them? Core narrowed their eyes in frustration. It's not my job to enforce the behavior of every single person in the Omega timeline. Everyone must be free. Everyone must be afforded free will and the chance to do the right thing on their own terms. As Core spoke, Prodigal collapsed to his knees, his bones rattling. My sister! They took my sister! I can't save her if I'm trapped here! His sister? PJ's soul tugged at the mention of a sibling. He couldn't imagine how he'd feel if something like that happened to one of his siblings. PJ stood, dusting himself off and flexing his arm, good as new, mostly. Leave Diva's rescue to us, said Core. Right now, hundreds of people have been killed and even more are injured. We need to form recovery efforts. So in other words, you're not going to do anything about it. Then let Prodigal and us go save her, said the Undying. Out of the question. Nightmare wants Prodigal dead and whoever else knows of Melody's fate. It's better he remains in custody. Frisk then turned to Skep, giving him the order to arrest Prodigal. A moment of hesitation, but it faded as Skep's expression turned stern. He stepped towards Prodigal. The tall papyrus, Undying, and Alphys moved forward to defend him. Just then, Prodigal reached out, grabbing the hand of the papyrus and Undying. A portal appeared below, dropping all four of them into a random AU enclosed. Damn it, said Skep, balling up his fists. Frisk shook their head before looking to Paper Jam. We don't have time for this. Paper Jam, can you track them down? Paper Jam blinked, but nodded. Yeah, I can track them down. It shouldn't be a problem. Template, do you mind staying a while and helping? I'll send a message to Fresh and see if he can find what's happening in the Dreamfalls. I'm on it, said Template, saluted before running off. Thank you, Paper Jam. I know you're not quite an adult yet, but we appreciate the help. As soon as our recovery efforts are put in place, I'll send Skep with the team to assist you in the Dreamfalls. Despite Core telling him to rest, it just wasn't in Skep's nature. He'd end up spending the next 12 hours directing rescue efforts and pulling survivors from the rubble. It was dark by the time he stopped, gathering with the other first responders in a mess tent. Mind fuzzy, he just finished pouring himself a mug of coffee when Frisk called his attention. They asked him to talk privately in one of the trailers. With a deep sigh, he followed after, drinking from the mug. By the time they got into the private trailer, he remembered the events prior. You were supposed to rest, Frisk turned to Skep. And were the people trapped and dying supposed to wait for me? He said, having no energy to filter himself as he sat on the small couch. There are also people in the Dreamfalls who need our help, but it's all right. I can have someone else lead that team. Skip shook his head. No, I'm still going to the drain falls. You're barely keeping your sockets open. I've been awake a lot longer and under far more pressing circumstances. I just need some caffeine. This is what all my training has been for. Skep took a deep breath. You knew I took Melody's journal, and you didn't say anything. Why? Frisk's face softened. It's because I trust you. I know how much Melody meant to you. I trusted that you would eventually turn the journal in or destroy it when you were ready. But I was careless. All this is my fault, he said, putting his head in his hand. After a shaken breath, Frisk touched his shoulder and gave him a hug. It's no one's fault. I forgive you. After a deep sigh, Skep pat Frisk on the back.